Today's guest has run a country music record label and has a movie script in production. So he's just the right person to run a cell therapy and regenerative medicine company, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the Health Biz Podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Pete O'Haron, CEO of FibroBiologics, which is developing cell therapies and regenerative medicines to tackle serious chronic diseases. If you like this show, please subscribe and leave a review. Pete, welcome to the Health Biz Podcast.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to talk about regenerative medicine, cell therapy, all that fun stuff. But I'd love to hear a little bit more before we do that about kind of where you come from, your background. What was your childhood like? Any childhood influences that have stuck with you throughout your career?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, I grew up just south of Houston in a little small town called Lake Jackson, which is a magical little town. It has produced 9 major league players. I think we had 2 stoplights, 13,000 people, 9 major league baseball players. Selena, the Tejano singer, was from there.
Yeah.
Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, I went to high school with him. There is the pacemaker was invented in Lake Jackson. Saran wrap was invented there. The Ziploc bag was invented there. It's probably the most innovative small town in America when I was growing up. And then I grew up in a medical family. My grandfather was the first urologist in Houston. He brought kidney dialysis to Houston in the early 50s, late 40s, and early 50s after he fought in World War II. He brought it from Dallas. The headlines of the paper said that Dr. O'Haron brings a human washing machine to Houston. So I am steeped in medicine. It's all I ever wanted to do.
That's pretty cool. Now, why was there so much innovation going on in this town? Was it just sort of by chance, or was there something in the water or something in the schools, or what?
I think, there was a lot of engineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers at Dow Chemical, which is kind of we called it Daddy Dow. And so you had the engineers, but you also had the operators, and my grandfather was a boiler maker. So you had these different levels of kind of work product that they produced, but the houses were all the same. There was not any visible economic difference. That's my theory, is that you didn't grow up thinking you had a particular box you had to fit in, that everybody was kind of in the same boat. And it was in the 60s and 70s and a little bit different time, but it's really special. Occasionally I will go on Facebook and put down the list of all the special people that have come from there. The CEO from Bayer, the new CEO, Bill Anderson, was a couple of years behind me in high school. The former general manager for the Utah Jazz, Dennis Lindsay, is a couple of years behind me in high school. So it's a really unusual, great place to grow up.
No, that sounds good. I asked different guests where they're from and what there's like, and I had somebody who grew up in India tell me he was from a small town in India, and I said, "What is the size of a small town in India?" He said 500,000 people. So, so anyway, that was a good calibration. All right, so then for school, I saw you went to Texas State. Did Bachelor of Science there?
I went to Texas State in San Marcos for my undergraduate in hospital administration, and then moved on to University of Houston for my graduate degree in hospital administration.
And that was sort of clear that you wanted to do those, programs and to be in that neighborhood?
Well, I started out pre-med, and back then it took a 3.75 GPA to get in medical school. If you had a 3.5, your plan B would be to go to Grenada. And Grenada had a medical school with full reciprocity back into the U.S. So I went into biology class one day, and the professor said, "Raise your hand if your plan B is Grenada." And half the class raised the hand. He said, "Move on to plan C because President Reagan invaded Grenada today, and that's no longer an option."
I was gonna say you could either go to Grenada as your plan B for that, or you could just enlist and get college paid for. But Yeah, I think that was a brief occupation, but yes, that was
Right.
something.
So that's
Yeah,
how I ended up. So I went what any college student would do. I grabbed a 6-pack of beer with my buddy, and we sat in his pool at his apartment complex and said, "We got to find a new major."
yeah.
And a buddy came by and said, "How about hospital administration?" And I didn't even know that that was a degree plan. And when I got into it, I don't think I ever made another B in my major. I, I was at home at that point. I knew that's exactly what I wanted to do.
That's good. If you get into something and a little bit haphazardly, but you were sort of you were next to it. You just didn't know that it necessarily existed.
Right, right, and I loved it. It was a fantastic, a great broad training. I like to say if you have a graduate degree in hospital administration, you can do virtually any job in America. Really great training.
So I'm hearing like a relatively straightforward path, right? Grew up in a innovative place, medical family, went to school nearby, just major medical capital. You shifted into hospital administration. A lot of things on your resume sort of say, healthcare. But I also heard this part about, country music and movies and all that. Like, where is that just like a recent thing, or was that part of the plan B and a half at the time?
Well, I didn't know. I was kind of the music guy growing up, so I was the one
Yeah,
that trying to introduce all my classmates to the newest band. I brought Van Halen album to school in 7th grade to show it around, when they first came out. So I was always that guy, but I never considered country music. But I'd sold a company and they had me on a 2-year non-compete and really looking for something to get into. And a relative of mine was a singer. And I said, I don't even know what this means, but you want to go to Nashville and cut a demo? She said, what does that mean? And I said, I have absolutely no idea,
yeah,
but it sounds great when I say it. So 14 years later, I had a record label, not 14 years later, but 2 years after that, we formed a record label. And I had a record label on Music Row in Nashville for 13, 14 years.
nice.
It was a great, it was a great run. We really enjoyed it.
There's a lot of negative things about non-competes, and not the Reagan administration, but the Biden administration is trying to do away with them. But I have heard, from entrepreneurs who've been in something that heads down on it and they can't imagine doing something else. They're actually like really being forced. Like, you're not allowed. You're gonna have to give up your fortune if you do that, and really look at something else. Not enough of them actually take the type of path that you described, something totally different, but they really might have, really might scratch an itch.
Right. Well, we had cut a few songs and then we're trying to meet with attorneys and they wouldn't meet with us because I guess a lot of people try to get attorneys to pitch
Yeah,
their artists for them. And I found one attorney, and he was actually Faith Hill's attorney at the time.
nice.
And I said, what do we do? And he said, I love the music. What we'll do is we'll shop her around, and if she gets a record deal, you're in the game.
Yeah,
And I said, well, that was easy. How long
yeah.
does that take? And he said, well, I have a client who's cleaning homes right now, and she's been signed to a major for 7 years. And I
Wow.
said, what do they do? Just sit on the bench? And he said, they sit on the bench until they're ready to until they're ready to put them in the game. And I said, what if we start our own label? And he
Yeah,
said, well, you might be ahead of the game, but you certainly have more control over it. So we started that process, had no idea the politics involved in
yeah.
getting music played and all of that. So we kind of went a little blindly into it, but really enjoyed the studio time and all the people we've met in Nashville and at radio. It's just it was a really great. And then in 2019, when we saw the explosion of discovery in fibroblasts, I just told Nashville, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I love what we're doing, but there's too much at stake here and there's too many people to cure. We've got to wind down that label. So that's what we did.
Yeah. All right. Well, sounds like a good story. So, all right. So back to healthcare a little bit here. So I saw you were at Christus, which is a big healthcare system. Neosurge, Fibrogenesis were a few that I saw there. Give me a couple highlights before we talk about FibroBiologics.
So I was at Christus. That's where I did my hospital administration. Had a great run there. That was it was a multi-billion-dollar hospital system owned by nuns from Ireland,
Nice.
believe it or not. So I remember my first day there. My mentor said, "Pete, do you have a problem working for women?" And I said, "I don't think so. I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever even thought about that, but I don't think I do." And he said, "Great. Today you work for 363 of them. They're
Nice.
all nuns." And so did that. And then I was working on a project, and a gentleman showed up with an instrument that he had talked to some doctors about, and they said he didn't know where to go from there. And they said, you should go take it to Pete and see what he thinks. And so I launched into product development back in 1996, I guess it was. And that was my real home. I mean, I
Okay.
loved hospital administration, but product development, innovation, inventing, commercialization, it was a kind of
Circuitous.
a winding road.
Yeah.
You get the word, a winding road to get to that point, but that was the real place I was supposed to be all along, was in that area. So we developed a line of surgical instruments, and we showed them to every venture capitalist in the country and said we'd invented the best surgical system in the world, and all 100 of them said, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
Well, 25 patents later, we returned 950% to those shareholders and went back to those VCs, and we thanked them for their guidance and told them what we'd done. And they all said, well, we're check writers, whatever you do. And I said, we just deal with individual angels, surgeons. We love that group. They're natural inventors. They have great deal flow. And so we launched into Fibrogenesis. French neurosurgeon, wife's French dermatologist. They had this idea that you could take a dermal fibroblast, a skin cell, and if you applied pressure to it in a low oxygen environment, it would turn into a chondrocyte or a cartilage-type cell, and you could regrow the disc. So I loved it. I mean, everything we'd kind of worked on in the past were improved technologies, but this one was a game changer. So that's what started us down the pathway of working with fibroblasts. We were the first company. We're still the only one that I know of working on it.
Well, you more or less answered my question about what are fibroblast cell-based therapies, and it sounds like there's a whole range of therapies that can come out of this approach.
So they are, I guess I would explain it kind of stem cell 2.0. There's two cells in the human body that you can use to regenerate tissue and cure chronic disease. There's a stem cell, which everybody's heard about, and there's a fibroblast, which almost nobody's heard about. The irony is that fibroblasts outnumber stem cells 5,000 to 1. They're the most common cell in the human body. And they outperform stem cells. They're more potent. They're easier to harvest, easier to grow. They are lower cost than stem cells. And when I explain that, people inevitably say, well, if they're so good, why don't we know about them? And my theory on that is that that stem cells won the Nobel Prize in 2012 when Dr. Yamanaka in Japan created the first induced pluripotent stem cell. That is to take one cell type and turn it into another cell type. The second irony of the story is he used a fibroblast to do that. So fibroblasts are really what created the stem cell revolution. Then after that, Jim Allison in Houston won the Nobel Prize for immunotherapy for cancer. You saw that was a hot button product for years after that. And then most recently, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier won for CRISPR.
Yeah.
So you can see the kind of the trend is who's ever been highlighted by that Nobel Prize, they get a lot of oxygen, a lot of investment. And so while everybody, 30 plus companies were running off and developing stem cells, we were discovering fibroblasts had much more potential, virtually an explosion of discovery. We were at one point filing 2 to 3 patents a week
Wow.
on these discoveries.
So Pete, all these people that won these Nobel Prizes, they're all from your town also, I take it?
They're not. No, they are not. But we would love to have them.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, so you got all these patents, all this approach, and fibroblasts can do all sorts of things. You've got some very interesting indications that you're going after. I saw on your website, it looks like MS, wound healing, cancer, anti-aging, if I've picked those out right. What is the logic behind the ones that you're going after, and are those the ones?
Well, wound care is, we used a human dermal fibroblast, so wound care seems like a natural progression of that, and we're seeing great results in that it heals in half the time compared to the leading wound care product on the market, which is really exciting. We gave a presentation on that this morning. Our multiple sclerosis, we've done a small safety trial on humans, and while it was only 5 patients, we stopped the progression of multiple sclerosis in all 5 patients. So that's really exciting for us. We're also working in degenerative disc disease and orthopedics, which is kind of where we started. We also have psoriasis coming up. We're launching our cancer preclinical work this summer. And then thymic involution is an area that is really exciting, a little bit exotic. The thymus gland sits right below your breastplate. It's the teaching center for the immune system. So you've heard of T cells; those are thymus cells. The As the thymus gets older, or as the human gets older, and when they get in their 50s, 60s, and ultimately 70s, the thymus gland starts shutting down through a process called involution. It's almost non-functioning in your 70s. So you don't have more cancer in your 70s than you had in your 40s. It's that your thymus gland stops teaching the immune system. So we had an idea a number of years ago to regenerate that thymus gland, to take it back to when it was younger, and to re-energize it. Because I can't think of anything that could lead to extension of human life more complete than a fully functioning immune system. So we're working in that area, and we're seeing some really exciting preclinical data.
So where do these different development programs stand? It sounds like you've got some safety, some starting in, but that are giving you maybe an exciting glimpse into what the efficacy could look like. Where do things stand?
So we'll be starting our diabetic foot ulcer trial in January, followed by multiple sclerosis, and then right after that, you'll see degenerative disc disease. And then by the time we finish that, we should have all of our preclinical work done for psoriasis, and we should have a pretty good pathway for cancer at that time.
What would you imagine, sort of looking ahead, what's your plan for how you're going to do development? Would you imagine, going all the way through and becoming a vertically integrated major biotech or pharma company, or is the objective to get some good, phase 2 package data together and to be able to out license?
I think I would say we're proceeding towards commercialization, and we would be open to any sort of partnership or collaboration that's out there. I saw CRISPR, they just received their approval for sickle cell anemia in December. Their partner on that was Vertex, and they chose to partner to roll it out through Vertex instead of starting their own sales team. And so they're doing a split with Vertex. That, those are the decisions we'll have to make as we come up and see what's in the best interest of the shareholders.
I saw a quote from Walter Isaacson on your website, and I wasn't sure whether he's an author, whether or not he was endorsing your company explicitly, or if you were drawing inspiration from him, or somewhere in between.
I just am a big fan of his work. I just finished the Elon Musk book he did. I finished the Jennifer Doudna book. If you haven't read those are great Walter Isaacson books. I'm just a big fan of his work.
I had someone recommended the Elon Musk book to me, and I read it. I partly listened to it. It's available actually on Spotify Premium. It's included within that, and so I listened to it. I listened to most of it. I read part of it, and it was fascinating and gave a really very good insight, into Elon Musk. And he figures the guy's in the news so much, you already know about him, but there was a lot to be learned from his early upbringing and sort of how he did things, and it made some of the more recent things that he's done, especially with the like the firing everybody in the supercharger team and then hiring some of them back. That's just part of his algorithm.
I know, you hear that stuff, and it's so drastic, but it works for him. The takeaway I had from the book was that if they're doing cost cutting measures, I mean, he's on the factory floor. He's saying, why does that piece go there? Why does it take 2 people to do that? Can we do it with 1? And so his single-minded obsession for cost up management of his car is what led him to be the most successful in the world. You see, there's nobody else with electric vehicles making money.
Yeah.
So not only are they producing the most, they're making more money than anyone else. And that was a single-minded obsessiveness with the cost structure. I just am a huge Elon Musk fan. I mean, you think about it, in our lifetimes, the people that have come through, these tremendous innovators, from Gates to Steve Jobs to Elon Musk. I mean, they're just, it must have been what it was like when, when they were developing, when Thomas Edison was developing the light bulb. I mean, we're getting to watch it in real time.
Yeah. No, it's definitely exciting. I mean, Steve Jobs is the one that is probably in some ways the most similar, and Isaacson wrote a book about him um, as well. And I am a kind of a Tesla fanboy. I've had one for several years now,
Oh,
and
great.
it works great, you know. So, and it's very low cost of ownership, and it's terrific. So,
I had a
um,
friend who asked me to ride in his, and he took his hands off the steering wheel and
yeah,
let it change lanes at 70 miles an hour on the highway. And
yeah.
it's a lot of faith.
All right, so now your company actually went public through some sort of an innovative direct listing mechanism. What is that? Why is that an important way to why is that important for your business?
Well, when you're ready to start doing your human trials, you need access to capital, and it's just where you have to be if you're going to be in this space. So we looked at the different avenues available to us. We looked at SPACs, and they were suffering a 95% redemption rate,
Yeah,
so it wasn't really a great option at the time. We looked at traditional IPOs. We didn't like the fact that we would have a fully underwritten IPO, take us 9 months to get there, and then the night before they could say, well, market conditions forces us to recalibrate your valuation, and we're
yeah,
going to, so that was not attractive to us. The other one was a reversing into a public shell. Well, I mean, I've done that before. Once you reverse into a public shell, I'm sure you're going to end up with a rogue shareholder showing up with a non-dilutive agreement written on a restaurant napkin, and then you're
yeah,
going to have to deal with that. So that led us to the direct listing.
yeah,
And to me, it is the best combination of all of those because you have control over the process. You go out when you say you're going to go out. You price it at the valuation that you agreed to with the bankers and with NASDAQ, and you're not beholden to any one particular group. So it was a lot of work, but I think the true test of it is, would you do it again? And I would do it again in exactly the same
yeah.
way. And there's not many of us out there. I think NASDAQ told us there's only two companies that have ever done it in Texas. One of them was a software company. The other was us. So it's a lot of work. You have to do a lot of heavy lifting yourself,
Yeah.
but I would do it again.
Okay. And so, do you think more people will copy that, or are there some other reasons not to
We've
to
we've
do it?
had a lot of phone calls. I think
Yeah,
the limiting factor for a lot of companies in biotech is they take their original investments from venture capitalists.
yeah,
And so the issue you run into is, do you have enough shareholders to meet the criteria for NASDAQ?
right.
So when you take it through venture capitalists and you're ready to go public, you might have 20 or 30 shareholders.
Yeah,
We had 400 accredited investors. So
got
we
it.
easily met the highest level for NASDAQ. And so that was a big strength for us.
Interesting. Okay. So, Pete, is there a film in your future?
Well, we'll see. Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've written a couple of screenplays, and one is in development. So
yeah. Is it about a direct listing, or some other topic?
no, I need to. Maybe when you find 5 minutes of free time, I will
Yeah,
start one about the direct listing.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to circle back on that. Now, question I ask for all my guests, although I feel we sort of wandered into this topic already, is if you've read any good books lately. If there's anything you would recommend for our audience.
You know what, David? I listen to so many books a year. My most recent one I'm on right now. If you're a music fan, I'm listening to the autobiography of Geddy Lee about Rush, which is
Nice.
fascinating. It's a really long book, but it's great. I did the Cabeza de Vaca, the one of the conquistadors who landed in Florida, came in with just a really crazy Odyssey story over a decade, and ended up in maybe it was 4 years, but he ended up in California. Came through Galveston, was enslaved, escaped, re-enslaved, allowed himself to be enslaved another time, and ended up in California. So that is a fantastic book. Of course, I read all the biographies I can get my hands on. Jim Johnson and Oscar Munoz from United Airlines was a great one, and then everything that Walter Isaacson comes out with. So
Excellent.
always has
All right.
something queued up.
No, that sounds good. Well, Pete O'Haron, CEO of FibroBiologics, and a whole lot more. Thanks for joining me today on the Health Biz Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Health Biz Podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.